Hello, everybody. I hope that everybody is able to view, able to tune in, able to stream. I hope that everybody who is coming in the waiting room, now that I've opened it up, everybody can get in here. If you have friends who are supposed to be here, if you got a good homegirl on the Smart Brown Girl Book Club who's supposed to be here, if there's somebody you're used to seeing in the hey Kaylin, if there's somebody that you're used to seeing in the comments on YouTube, on Facebook, on Twitter who's not here, tell them we are getting started, right? And so these Zoom live book club discussions are new. They are new to 2022, 2023, as we continue to expand in the digital space in all things Smart Brown Girl Book Club, SBG Book Club. And so today's live Zoom discussion is about You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty by the brilliant, the beautiful themselves, Akwaeke Emezi. If you are not familiar with Akwaeke Emezi's work, you must be new here to the book club because we have read Freshwater. We have talked deeply about Freshwater and all of the beauty that is that text. We talk on and on about the New York Times bestseller, Death of Vivek Oji, even if I don't think that was an official book club pick, but so many people in the book club loved Freshwater. So we've definitely been recommending that back and forth. And so I'm going to be getting us oriented here with all of our housekeeping things, all of our where are we going, what are we doing, what are we discussing today things until about 3:05, 3:06, so we can give people enough time to pop in, get their thing, get your water. I have mine. Get your pieces of paper. If you are a note taker, I am as well. There's no shame in needing to engage in literature with all of the tools that you need so that you can be here, successful, and all of that good stuff. So, like I said, we're going to be waiting till about 3:05, 3:06. Hello, everybody who's popping in the chat. Please use the chat. It makes it fun for all of us, me, you, the viewers at home, if we're having a lively discussion in here. Share the link. Share with your sister, your cousin, your homegirl, your good Judy on the block who loves to read. In this month's syllabus for You Made a Fool of Death is a true gift from Kaylin here in the syllabi cohort. Kaylin is brilliant, amazing, scholarly on all things Black girlhood, Black femininity, Black femininities, really, and what it means for us to call all of these things, all of these identities into question when we think about Blackness, colonialism, and the ongoing just violences of misogynoir. So shout out to Kaylin. If you have the syllabus, you can start pulling it up. If you don't have the syllabus, please know that all Smart Brown Girl SBG Book Club syllabi are available online just about all the time. I think we still have a sale running right now where you can get most of our syllabi for $4.99. The syllabi are a really important accessibility point when it comes to online and real life discourses around what it means to read, and the assumption that if you just pick up a book, you're able to read it and understand it and comprehend it. That's not true. It's not true. Sometimes you need the context, the background. You need to know what geopolitical settings are we talking about. Hi, Asia, joining from Oakland. You need to know background about what style this writer usually writes in. So Our syllabi really help you if you are one of those people who are always getting told, you know, you need to read more, you should read more. You're really curious about reading, particularly contemporary and like mid 20th century literature is where we really place ourselves here in the Smart Brown Girl Book Club. So our book club syllabi really guide you through themes, questions, not just discussion questions, but internal reflection questions are some of my favorite part about writing the syllabi. And you get a cool community of people who are also reading books either asynchronously or read along with us in all of our SBG online groups. And so with that being said, and as our time starts to wind down to about 3:05, 3:06, I'm about to start getting into some questions. You already see Kaylin and Asia modeling in the chat. Please use the chat feature. If you are following along on YouTube, please use the YouTube live discussion features as well, so that I can be all the way tuned in to everything that we're doing and all of our points of engagement before we get started. So as we start talking about You Made a Fool of Death with Your Beauty, this is a book that completely rocked me emotionally when it came out last year. I have been telling everybody, coworkers, friends, lovers, teammates of all kinds to pick up this book because it is a good one about grief and relationships and place and belonging. So if you're looking to learn and understand what our themes are, those are our introductory themes. If you continue beyond this point in the video, if you're viewing the playback, or if you're viewing live with a friend and you're ear hustling, there may be not spoilers, but we're going to dive into this book and we're going to dive into it without much care or concern for the nitty gritty, because this book starts off hot and heavy already. And so it's kind of impossible to talk about the details of the book without letting some juicy stuff slip. So that is the only other disclaimer you'll get from me. And as we jump into this book, our first question that Kaylin gives us is about the book's very scandalous beginning. And so Kaylin says, the book begins with Faye having a sexual encounter with Milan, a man she just met, in the bathroom of a club. It is clear that Faye has made up her mind on what she wanted for the night. How does this scene introduce Faye to the reader, and what are some assumptions that can be made about her? And so I know I have answers. Please drop your answers in the chat. If you want to come off mute and you're here in the Zoom room, you can please put on your raise your hand feature. And then I'll unmute you and let you pop off mute if there's something that you want to add. And in that same vein, I will copy the question into our chat. So what do we think about the first scene of the book? Because personally, when I started reading this book and I saw the hibiscus flowers and the bright orange, I automatically thought we were starting on an island. So when we actually started in a bathroom on Memorial Day weekend in Bushwick, I was like, okay, so we're not going immediately tropical. And so I had to reorient myself from like the romance on vacation sort of vibe to like a general summertime, I'm assuming like 20 something, maybe 30 something, like cast of characters. And so I think this scene for me does a really great job of introducing us to both people and place. I see a hand. So I'm going to.
Hello.
Hi, Kaylin.
So I had the same assumption too when I saw the cover of the book. It was kind of giving like island vibes a little bit. And obviously the first chapter didn't open up. I think the island vibes came a little bit later. But that bathroom scene was, I ain't gonna lie, it was very juicy. It was very shocking to me. But it kind of made me look at her crazy because I'm not a one night stand type of person. I know everybody has their own kinks and, things that they prefer in their sexual life. But me personally, I'm just not a one night stand. And her engaging in that and also letting him finish in her was just like, girl, like, what is a one night stand is one thing, but an unprotected one, it was like, girl, you just operating on like straight emotions right now. All feelings, no brain. And I was like, why? What is making her do this? Why does it seem like she is trying to find herself through these relationships? And then I wanted to know, because I think the first chapter mentions her boyfriend loosely, very, very loosely. If I'm not mistaken, I might have to go back. And it just brought up a whole questions like, what was her previous relationships like? Why is she basically treating her body like that? So that's what I got.
And I think, thank you, Kaylin. And I think that shock is also intentional, right? Like when we think about the things that hook us into reading. Like I definitely remember when I was like 15, 16 and learning how to write essays and pieces of writing for the first time. Like the thing that your English teacher in high school emphasizes to you is like, you need a hook, right? And so I think the first line of the book, Milan was the first person that Faye had since the accident really gets us there, because it's like, first off, you're not only in sort of this like sexual experience in media res, you're in the midst of this grief from the very beginning. And I see some great stuff happening in the chat. I hope I'm pronouncing your name right. Is it Jolie? Jolly? Please correct me with the phonetic spelling or come off mute. It gives romance book entrance. Absolutely. I was cheering her on. Get it how you live. Agreed. And I'm sure in this first question, we'll have a discussion around like, what is Akweke also saying about sexual health and reckless personalities, but also all sexual experiences are risks. And so I think that sometimes when we're reading, we need to remember that like, when we're talking about conceptions of like what is safe, everything that is safe or risky happens within these really specific contexts, right? What is safe for you? What do you have access to in terms of healthcare, contraceptives, and all these other things? And I see Asia in the chat. I was shocked the whole time, to be honest. I felt like she was not using her head in the situation, but just following her gut and throwing all her common sense out the door. Well, my mom always said common sense ain't common. And so with that, I see we have another friend who is coming off of mute. And so let me give you your proper permission.
Hi, my name is Jolie. You pronounced it right.
Hey.
Hey, yeah, I read, so I was in like a romance book like era. So I was like, oh, okay, this is just where we're going with this book. So I took it at that. But I also was like, as somebody who understands, like sometimes you just gotta live, especially when you have followed the path of life. Sometimes you just gotta live and be free. Now, yes, was it promiscuous? Debatable, risky, yes. But I think she took the precautions, and they had the very quick conversations that, yeah, I'm on the pill and you good, I'm good. All right, let's get it popping.
Right. And some people don't do that. Like there's always great conversations around not just sexual health, but also reproductive health, more specifically when we're talking about sexual health and like disclosure and non-disclosure and the violence, the retributive actions, the threats of like revenge and all of these marks to safety that have very real effects on how close are we as a community, as a world to vulnerably talking about our health and our bodies, especially when we don't have universal healthcare, especially when we don't have so many things in an ongoing pandemic. And I'm not putting the world of the pandemic on the book, but that was where I was when I was thinking about this, because it also, for me, when I was reading it, I thought about how the world was starting to go buck wild here again in the US, of people going out to parties and all of these other things. And so it was very relatable in that sense of like, oh, I can envision this rooftop in Bushwick. I can envision this party that's popping. I can envision all of these people getting out here and just wanting to shake some ass and have fun after experiencing a whole lot of grief. And so I think that's something else that Akweke does really well in this book, as they cultivate this space of like, how does the party and the grief go together? And so from there, we've been talking a little bit about Faye's decisions, about the different grief that's present in this book overall as a theme. And so our next question goes straight to that. with a quote from Faye, right? And so the quote says, so Faye had moved down to New York because if she was a monster, then so was the city, glorious and bright and everlasting, eating up time and hearts and lives as if they were nothing. She wanted to be consumed by the relentless volume of a place so much louder than she was, a place where her past and her pain could drown in the noise. And that's from page 4, so very early on. And so we see that Faye is dealing with the loss of her partner and has chosen to move to New York because of this loss, right? And so how does Faye deal with her grief in these first few pages and throughout the book? Let's not go straight to the end if you can, because I want to give our friends who are going to be in the next live discussions a chance. But if you could talk about what does Faye do to move through her grief in the beginning? And Jolie, is your hand still up from the last one, or is this for this question? Asia, I think you're all good.
Oh, okay. Hi, everyone. So yeah, I really like this question. I felt like it really hit home, especially for me. If I could just share a little bit about myself, not to like trauma dump or anything, but I am originally from the East Coast, and I moved to California about a year ago after my mom passed, and I was moving for work, but I felt like part of me was moving, just because of like a lot that was happening back home and like the hurt and the grief that my family was feeling. And I just felt like a part of me needed like a new scenery and like a place where I could come into adulthood without having so much baggage holding me down. So I really related to Faye, I think that's how you pronounce her name. I really related to her because in the book she mentioned like she didn't want to be coddled and she didn't want the loss of her lover Jonah to like shadow over her in like all of her relationships. So yeah, I think the move to New York was her way of finding like solitude and a way out of her mind, because it's easy to kind of just drown in sorrow when it comes to grief. So I think like changing her location was a kind of a direct result of her loss.
Asia, I very much agree. And I also think it's really, first of all, thank you for sharing and being vulnerable with a whole bunch of, I'm assuming, strangers, because you don't have to be. So I commend you on sharing that. And I hope your mother is resting well. And I think it's also important that Faye doesn't just move anywhere. All right, like she is telling us the intentionality of like this move that she has to New York because it is this big city, because it is this swallowing city, like you're saying, right? Like if grief is all consuming, then what is a metropolis that even in like fictional representation gets represented over and over and over again as a place where people can lose themselves, whether it's losing themselves in jobs, in the pursuit of like careers in art, which Faye is an artist. And so I think that that's also like, as you're building up an understanding of Faye and getting to know all of these parts of her, it becomes really clear why New York, it becomes the setting. And then you get this juxtaposition, right? Based on the cover you have, if you have the US hardback cover, right? You get this beautiful orange hibiscus palm background. And we get there eventually, but we definitely start in this very like cluttered, claustrophobic city of New York. And I saw some good stuff in the chat. One element is isolation, that Caitlin says, absolutely, grief is isolating. And then Jolie says, I think she did a 180 in her life. She literally flirted with death herself and experienced loss. She's living out loud. Absolutely. And I hope we can come back to that. And Kai says, New York City as an environment feels like a good place to not be shadowed by Jonah while also being supported by Joy, who helps her move through the grief in a lot of ways. And I'm glad that somebody started bringing up Joy, because beyond Faye, I'm a Faye stan. I didn't want to start with that because I wanted to get us oriented into the discussion. But if Faye has one fan, it is me. If Faye has no fans, I am no longer of this world. That is my girl. I'm gonna stick beside her every time. And it's gonna be me and Joy right there. And so as Kai gives us this brilliant segue, let's zoom out for a little bit before we can zoom back in on Joy and Faye. So how is grief discussed in the Black communities that we're a part of? And how have you seen or experienced people dealing with grief? So I know Asia got us started on a really personal note, and again, thanking her for that. But how has grief been discussed in your communities that you live in with other Black people, amongst your friends, your family, your kin? How do you deal with grief?
So I know in my communities, grief is something we encounter a lot, but we don't really address it, or maybe we just don't have the language or vocabulary to address it. I'm a teacher. I teach high school in North Carolina, and I'm originally from DC. And recently, we had a student that he was killed through gun violence, and it was just very interesting seeing how we as a staff and as students kind of dealt with that, on top of, I don't know what was going on with this year, but since January, almost every single one of my coworkers has experienced death, whether it was in their, family circle or friend circle. And from what I can observe, it's just like, we give the little pep talks like, oh, it's going to be all right, just take it day by day. But it feels like we're kind of pushing it into our back pocket. And just looking at my students, because I teach all Black boys, and they grieve differently from the girls that I have taught in my career. And, with girls, they will take the time to, acknowledge that grief a little bit and like sit with each other and commune with each other. Whereas what I can see in my boys is kind of like it's a video game. Like they just experience it, and then it's like, okay, well, we got to keep moving forward. But you can kind of see like the grief and like the disappointment in their eyes, but they're unable to really discuss it and sit with that. And also, grief is uncomfortable as shit. Like nobody wants to be, experiencing it or just be thinking about that. And it brings me back to Faye. And I think that's part of the reason why she wanted to move to New York City, because in the city is so busy. There's always something that's going to distract you and keep your mind busy. But when you're living in like a quieter place, I think she's from like Boston or Cambridge or something like that. I'm not sure what that looked like, but I'm pretty sure it's not as busy as, New York City. So don't nobody want to sit, all day long in a quiet place where you can really like hone in on your thoughts, and then that brings up those painful memories. It brings up those feelings. So that's what I got.
Absolutely. And Kaylin, shout out to all the teachers. Shout out to all the high school teachers. My best friend is a high school algebra teacher. So I am no stranger to hearing about intergenerational stories of grief, particularly in a school setting, right, where you may be grieving someone who is a part of that school community or not, and how grief is landing with children. And I think sometimes it's even hard for people to hold the truth that Black teenagers are children, right? Like we use the word teenager, young adult, and all these other things that sort of linguistically obscure this idea of childhood. So thank you for amplifying this. Like there's something even in childhood happening with the ways that we are taught about care and grief and compassion. as children. And if other folks want to add their discussions of grief in the chat, please feel free to do so. For the sake of time, I'm going to drop our next question, which comes back to Kai's point that connected to New York as a city. Faye isn't alone in New York. Faye has her best friend, her ace boon coon, Joy. And we know that Joy is also a little bit reckless, a lot of fun. And when I think of Joy, I think about a good Saturday night after the club, though, when you're getting pizza or fries or something greasy with your friend and it just feels great. Like that's how Joy feels to me if I'm making the character into like a moment of time. And so for us here in the live discussion and for folks who are watching this back, what stands out to you about the friendship that we have going on between Faye and Joy? And how does this friendship, you think, help Faye as she processes this grief from the loss of her partner, Jonah? Jolie says, I love a well-written, supportive character, and Joy is that. And the nature of their relationship only makes them more intriguing. Please say more, Jolie. Other people, do you think that Faye and Joy's relationship itself as this own space, as this own intimate, vulnerable space makes them both more interesting as characters? Because I think that can happen. And I think that happens with a lot of ensembles. Like you could cherry pick characters out, but when these characters are together, there's something particularly magical. I think about that with the cast of Living Single a lot, actually. Joy lets her feel grief as Faye wants to, not how it should be performed. Okay, this is getting back into Kaylin's sharing about like what is authentic grief and what is grief that we're trying to put in our back pocket. Anybody else about Joy and Faye's relationship? Because Joy is also at the party. And so when we talk about Faye's recklessness, a thing I really appreciated about Joy was Joy stayed out of judgment. I think sometimes that can be really hard when we're talking about the reality or even the perception of safety of like, what is the position of your friend who loves you when you're doing something reckless? But they also know, maybe not an explanation, but understand sort of the lay of the land of that recklessness. And so I really enjoyed that Joy stayed out of judgment for the most part, and was also like an encouraging friend to having fun and not wallowing and performing that grief, as Jolie said.
I was basically just gonna say, Joy is a really loving friend. Like you can tell that Joy sees Faye in a way that just like reflects so much love and understanding. And I think like as a Black woman, it's good to have those relationships because moving through the world, it's like hard to be seen and understood. And when you express yourself, it can feel like no one understands. So I think it's like a really powerful thing to see Joy and Faye's relationship because it just shows that Faye is still doing her art. She's still like finding men. She's still like, talking freely about her emotions. Like she isn't closed off to the world because of what happened to her. And I think Joy is a big part of that.
Thank you, Asia. And then Jolie is asking in the chat if we're going to talk about the romantic aspect of Faye and Joy's relationship. So Jolie, I invite you to come off mute if you want to get us started with that part. That might be a little salacious for some people if you're not familiar with seeing just these fluid and organic expressions of queerness and bisexuality through characters. Like I think even in romances, we're used to like one relationship and one love interest and one expression of affection is like our quota. And I even think in this book, Amezi pushes that, right? Of like, does the romance novel have to have one love in it?
I'm off mute now. Sorry, I'm at a baseball game.
It's so
I was
good.
trying to find somewhere not where people loud. But yeah, I was surprised by it when I first saw it. But it also, I was like, even in my surprise, I loved it. I was like, that's beautiful. You have somebody who was able to love you in more than one way and still be supportive of you and not be jealous when other people come into your life to love you in the way she used to. Even though I think they said it like they tried it once or twice. But I didn't expect it, but I loved it. And I like that KK allowed Faye to experience love in so many different ways and with so many different types of people.
Absolutely. That was one of my favorite parts. Oh, is somebody else chiming in or were you done?
I'm done because I'm at this baseball game.
Thank you. And I admire your dedication for logging in even at the baseball game. I hope the innings are going well for whoever you're supporting. How do other people feel about that element of Joy and Faye's relationship and getting that background? You can talk about how it felt for the character experience, or even as me and Jolie were getting into, like, for Amezi to make that choice as a writer. Were you shocked? Were you surprised? And I'll drop our next question in the chat. It wasn't surprising? I guess not. I mean, when you get a first page of this novel like we get, there's not too many things that Faye could do from there. I think that it's too surprising. Right. And so as we continue talking about Faye and Joy, though, we understand that throughout the first chapters, we hear Faye's inner thoughts and dialogue with Joy. She is thinking deeply about her life and her pain and says, quote, "I think we're just figuring out how to survive a world on fire, that it's okay to be alive." And again, these heavy hitting quotes are coming early in the book. And so that's from page 5, if you're following along. And Kaylin says they are both in their 30s and Joy is wondering if they are experiencing a midlife crisis. How do you manage living in a world that's on fire? And I'll start and then we can pass it around to some folks who are here. Folks want to come off mute or throw it in the chat. How do I survive a world that's on fire? I have never known a world that wasn't on fire. And so I think the way that I survive it is very similar to Faye and Joy. You get your good folks who love you and love you up, down, 180, 360, because sometimes you're not going to know in the ash and the smoke and the soot of the world on fire, how to come back to yourself sometimes. And I think that that's a real and intimate experience of humanity, of losing someone, something, a moment, an opportunity, a relationship, whatever you're grieving. If you're grieving the world at large or the world that you know is possible, that's an even bigger expression of grief. I think it's really important to have people who love you and help you remember the love that you have for yourself when the world is on fire. So I have an amazing Black mama who loves me through any and all things. And I have amazing friends, family of all kinds who love me through the smoke and through the soot. And so that's what I will share. Does anybody else have anything that they want to share on how they manage living in a world that's on fire? Asia says, "I seek out the happy moments through the dark times."
So I know this doesn't sound good, but sometimes my immediate reaction is to dissociate. So I'm very good at tuning things out, ignoring things. Even if they are high on my priority list, I will consume my time with reading, or I might go get a drink or smoke a blunt or something like that, just to keep my mind busy. But when it really does start to creep up on me and I get this, this feeling of like emergency, I definitely do have people in my corner. I got friends. My grandmother is my biggest prayer warrior. Like, I feel like my grandma is my therapist, my best friend, my matriarch. She is everything, my prayer warrior. She everything to me. And whenever I feel like I'm going through something that I can't handle, she has always been there to, steer me on the right path. Her tone is correct. Because as Black women, sometimes that tone, if you're talking to me a different way, it comes off differently, but she really does listen. My boyfriend has been a very, very positive aspect of my life. He can make me see things that I don't see. He has no problems checking me and say, hey, like, stop ignoring this shit. Like, you need to address it straight up like that. So that's how I manage a world on fire.
Absolutely. Quick question. Is your grandma Sagittarius? Because it's something about having a Sagittarius grandma.
So no, my grandma is actually a Cancer, but me and my boyfriend are both December Sagittarius.
I knew it was something up in there. And I hope he appreciates his shout out, because you bigging him up on here today. And so we have Asia in the chat. I seek out the happy moments through the dark times. And Jolie, has anyone in their 30s not known a world on fire? And that leads us into the next question in a sort of roundabout way, right? Because sometimes your world on fire is your interpersonal world. And sometimes some people, when they are on the outside looking in, will say that you caused that fire, right? And so what I'm getting at is that Joy is currently, throughout this book, in a romantic relationship with a married woman, right? Spoiler alert if you didn't make it that far yet. So Joy makes it clear that she does not care that this woman has a husband. If the wife don't care, how she's supposed to care more than her, sort of discussion goes on, right? And although this happens in real life, it is often frowned upon. If I had $1 for every Twitter discourse on infidelity or $200 dates, I would be rich. So how does Emezi use Joy to challenge our views on acceptable relationships? And I would really like to slide back and let y'all get into it, because I feel like this is one of those participant questions of like, how do we feel about Joy's relationships in this novel?
So I would say I don't feel like because I think like some people, because I'm in a relationship too, and I'm monogamous, and I eventually want to marry this person. So like when it comes to like media and the books that we read, I think marriage is kind of this thing that's like kind of played with a lot, or maybe not played with, but just like we come in it from like different points of view, different like backgrounds, ways of life. So I think Joy, specifically her outlook on relationships, it is led by her heart. It's not really led by her mind. And I feel like she is a lover who loves really deeply, and she just like goes like head over heels into love. She doesn't like let anything hold her back. So I'm kind of proud of Joy in a way. I think she doesn't put any walls around her heart despite the situation that she's in. I think she's a very open lover, and she looks to her relationships as like a way to express herself and feel love the way she wants to be loved. Yeah.
Asia, you put that so beautifully to me, like to think about an appreciation and a happiness for joy in this choice that I think in a really reductive manner, people would be like, oh, the cheater, right? Like at worst, the cheater, at best, like, oh, maybe joy could join the marriage as like a unicorn, right? Like having to fit into that construct rather than like, we're reading a novel full of people, Black people specifically, who are making autonomous choices. And yes, they are messy. And yes, some of them are reckless. But also there's a beauty. You made a fool of death with your beauty, right? Not just the physical beauty, but there is a beauty in like being reckless and in that being true to your feeling. Because I think we talk a lot about feeling, logic, responsibility, all of these things, but what is the beauty in a Black person and Black people being able to follow their feelings and live their life that way? And Jolie and Kaylin are having good discussion in the chat. Jolie says, I'm married and it's not Joy's responsibility to be worried about the marriage, it's the married person's. And Kaylin, who is hilarious, said, when has marriage not been fluid? People have been creeping since creation. I think people are just more open about it today. Also true. And you know what else has been happening since creation? The subject of our next chat question, when Faye and the infamous Nazir first meet, right? And so if we remember our buddy Milan from the first part of the book, as we talked already about the scene in the bathroom, sexual health, sex, relationship, all of that. When Faye and Nazir first meet, Faye gives Nazir the third degree, right, about his intentions and quickly brings up her relationship with Milan. And for folks who need help keeping it all together, Nazir and Milan are homeboys at this point. And so Faye wants to ask if Milan is okay with sharing. This changes the tone of the conversation really quickly. If you were reading the audiobook, it was probably really abrupt for you, like, oh, what's going on here, right? But why do you think Faye felt offended by Nazir's advances, or at best acts of kindness, right? And do you think she is ashamed of her relationship or interactions with Milan? Okay, Jolie says, I think Faye wanted the agency to make the decision and not letting the men make the decision to share her. Okay, so like some power dynamics at play with what we know about sexual relationships, the classic like group of homeboys and this beautiful woman, like Faye wanted to be the beautiful woman making the choice amongst the men and didn't want them to have sort of this side icky bro conversation. Anybody else got any opinions on this moment when Faye and Nazir meet again on a rooftop for the first time?
So I don't think she's really ashamed about, her deal with Milan. I think it's this idea of like the whole pass around culture, not wanting to, because I don't know what it is, but immediately when in that book, in that scene, when Nazir tries to make his move, my first thought was like, nigga, you know that your homeboy is dealing with this girl. Why would you choose this place out of all the times? Like you could have asked for a social media something and just hit her up on the back end. So to me, it did kind of feel shady. It was like, this is your homeboy. And I know sometimes homeboys do that a lot. I have personally seen that shit where they'll like, oh, I got this girl. And like the dudes will kind of backdoor their own homeboy to get whatever this girl is. So I think that was her immediate thought. Like, why would you try to hit on me? Why would you try to, push game on me, knowing that I'm dealing with this dude that is also your homeboy? type thing. But I also feel like Faye found attraction in him. Even though how weird that whole situation was, I think that she was like physically and sexually attracted to him. And a piece of her wanted to kind of pursue that relationship, which obviously unravels later on in the book. So for her, I think it was just like, I ain't trying to be like the community coochie. I'm not trying to have y'all all sitting in the room discussing, because men definitely do discuss. They be sharing pictures, videos, tips, tricks, all of that stuff. And I don't think she wanted to be, the discussion at the table.
Thank you, Kaylin. Your feedback and your answer also makes me think, oh, I just had the thought and I lost it. It makes me think of like this larger conversation about relationships that happen through the book, because obviously it's a romance novel. People love to fixate on our couple that we get at the end that we're not going to spoil right now. But I think that your comment in Asia's is really telling us like there are multiple intimacies and relationships that should be happening here. And the chief among them is Mulan and Nazir's relationship, because how close are you to your friend if you lack boundaries in this way? And also it brings me back to your earlier comment about like creeping since the beginning of creation, about like how Black grandmothers in particular are good for reassuring in Black girl children in particular that you are single until you're married. I don't know if other people's grandmothers emphasize that to them growing up, but just like even within the recklessness and the messiness of these love triangles, if you want to call it that, I'm still thinking about old elder Black people who would have looked at even this messy situation and be like, well, nobody is shacking up and nobody's married. And so what are we talking about here? So I think that's also really interesting, is like you get these moments right after talking about a marriage, albeit a marriage in crisis with Joy and Joy's lover. But I'm noticing through the writing of this novel that there are so many relationships and so many sequences of conversations that I think Emezi intentionally put after some larger discussions. Does anybody else have an opinion on the moment when we first meet Nazir in this book? Please, I welcome you to come off mute. Just raise your hand if you're new. If you just popped in, use the raise your hand feature and I can help you unmute. And we got some people in the chat. Jolie said Nazir had no shame. And Asia said, yeah, Nazir was out of pocket. I know that's right. See, we're getting some Faye stands. I think I can convert some people to the team, right? And so our next question continues to talk about Faye and Nazir, and we're talking about dinner, right? So Nazir tries the spit game on the rooftop. Faye finally agrees to go to dinner with Nazir after cutting things off with Milan, but instantly Faye says, quote, I can't do it, Joy. I don't know why I said yes. This is some hoe ass shit, working my way around the friend group. And that happens a little later around page 32. And so what does society, social media in particular, say about dating multiple people within a friend group? How do you think Faye should handle this situation? I know Kaylin's answer earlier got us pretty far, but does anybody want to take this question on? What do you think Faye should do? What would you do if you were Faye and it's summer in Bushwick and everybody's fine? And you're not married, you're still grieving. An immense amount of grief is holding itself within your body. And it's hot outside.
It's hot outside. Yeah, I was gonna type it in the chat, but I'll just say it. I think if I were Faye, I would, of course, like say like not right now. I just, was dealing with your friend. I don't think so. But it seemed like Nasir was like really running game on Faye, to be honest. Like he was like, you know, I didn't mean it like that. I just wanted to get to know you. I felt a connection. And I kind of feel like if that were me, I don't know if I could, I don't know if I could say no, just because there is attraction there. And like Faye is trying to explore her like newfound liberation and her interest in a relationship again. So I think just like taking it slow and seeing if it could blossom into a friendship and then finding like an actual common ground before turning it into something sexual.
Okay, and y'all are really helping me reprocess this book because your comment about Faye is finally coming back to herself. Like I'm trying to think of this as if we were based in reality, and you're so right. Like if we start this book and the first person that she has been with sexually and intimately in that way is your homeboy since the accident. You the first second man out. Like let's be very Faye is beautiful, is Bushwick in the summer. These are all 30 plus something adults, like getting, like I know people on the internet and in the memes, right? Like it's pitchforks for my girl Faye, but would you be any better? Like, and this is not a question for pure provocation. It's just like, imagine you have all of this grief. You have not been with anybody, kissed anybody, touched anybody since the death of your partner. And you're outside in Bushwick, Afrobeats is playing, reggaeton is playing, and somebody has empanadas on the street. Can we blame her? Can we? Thank you, Kai. It's so many fun. Oh, okay. You don't know. It's so many fine men in Brooklyn, but in Bushwick specifically. Thank you, Asia. No, we cannot blame her. And I'm scrolling up to Jolie's comment. Oh, I found his hunting method attractive. And I would have folded like a $2 bill. Okay, I'll be a hoe and keep it moving. But then we wouldn't have gotten where we did. Because did Faye press up on that man, or did that man come looking for my good sister? Did Faye press up on that man, or did that man come looking for my good sister? Okay. And so as we're getting this conversation going, Faye felt guilty about Milan, about Nazir, and not just with them together, but we have to remember like Jonah is this loving phantom, right? This phantom of grief throughout the novel, right? And so Faye feels guilty for dating after the death of her partner, period. So why do you think her guilt is keeping her from showing up as her full self on this date with Nazir? Does anybody want to take us through that? And I'm seeing some comments about how it was mutual and all of these other things, right? Like he called her out of the blue, everything. But do we understand why Faye is feeling a little bit guilty? Okay, Jolie, adding some very worthwhile provocations. A date is more intimate. Absolutely. And Jordan, I'm about to invite you to unmute.
I can't blame her. I think for sure she just hasn't like processed everything yet. And I feel like in the society, definitely we shame women for being sexually positive or being more sexually promiscuous and exploring something. And I think that, like you said, definitely I agree that out of the fear of her not addressing everything yet, she's like taking that guilt on. I don't know. I just wanted to echo your feelings.
Thank you. Do you think that the grief is what's preventing her from being intimate with Nazir, or is it something else?
I would say the grief, and then maybe she's not feeling him like that. Like she's not even really into him. You know, just because a handsome man is into you doesn't mean that you have to reciprocate. And like you said, it could be the grief. It could be like, oh, he's attractive, but not like he's nice. You know how when you talk like, oh, he's nice, and nice is not enough.
Right. He's like the guy who, when he swipes up on your Instagram story with the hard eyes, you say thanks. And you don't drop the floody line back, right? Like this might just, he's not him. Can we live in a
Mhm.
world where Nazir is just not him? We meet somebody who's very himish at the end of the book. So do we think it's the guilt of the grief? Do we think it's a loyalty to Milan? What do we think is going on when Faye can't really get her head right on this date?
I mean, I think Homie Hopper too, like in my head.
Oh, not the dreaded Homie Hopper label.
Well, just on the most like on the surface, maybe that's also her hesitancy, if that's what she's thinking.
Got you, right? So maybe Faye has a fear of the label.
Yeah, I'm not judging her. They could be more than one attractive man in a group. That's not your fault.
Okay, and sometimes they all just happen to be homeboys.
It is what it is.
Listen, hey, I'm just saying, sometimes, not for me, but I've seen, sometimes they're all homeboys in some way or another, all right? Certain organizations just get them all together and then we're left to deal with the fallout. So thank you, Jordan, for coming off of mute and offering that. So we're heading to our last few minutes of today's discussion. We're running up through chapters 1 through 5. Caitlin and some of my other lovely cohort members will be doing the rest of the chapters of this book. And I hope to be able to jump in on the live Zoom with folks again, right? But as we continue to talk, Faye finally lets Nazir into the art studio, right? And when we get there, he sort of has this reaction that's based in trepidation, fear, because like Kaylin said, there's blood everywhere. It is clear that Faye is using her current art pieces to express her grief and her dealings with loss. How does art play a role in your own grief? Music, literature, etc. And I can say for me, the grief that I know most intimately is when I was a child, I lost 3 grandparents, back to back to back years. And I really got into watching movies, reading books really heavily during that time. I'd always been a bookish kid. But sometimes I just wanted quiet amidst all of the emotions that weren't just my own. But when you're grieving as a collective, like as a family,